The number on the paper didn't add up, and Saoirse knew it before she even finished the second column. She'd been doing books since she was 14. Her uncle's auto shop, then the restaurant on Dundas, where she worked weekends through high school, then 3 years at a logistics company downtown until the company folded and took her last paycheck with it. She knew numbers the way some people knew faces. She could feel when something was wrong before she could name it. The ledger in front of her wasn't wrong the way mistakes were wrong. It was wrong the way lies were wrong. Careful, deliberate, engineered to look clean. She set down the pen. The fluorescent light above her hummed. Outside the window of her uncle's old office. Her office now, technically, though the bank would probably dispute that by end of month. The February snow was coming down hard off Lake Ontario. The kind of snow that buried things. Her uncle had borrowed money. That much she'd known. What she hadn't known, what he'd apparently decided, she didn't need to know before his heart gave out in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons in Scarborough, was who he'd borrowed it from. She found out 3 days after the funeral. The man who knocked on the door wore a grey coat and said very little. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a number on it, a name at the top, Whitmore, and a due date that had already passed. She'd heard the name before. Everyone in certain parts of the city had, the same way you heard about black ice on the 4001, not up close, not personally, just as a fact of the landscape that you noted and moved around carefully. She was still holding the envelope when the man said, "Mr. Whitmore's expecting your call." She didn't call. She showed up. The building didn't look like anything. That was the point, she understood later. A converted warehouse in the Port Lands, close enough to the water that you could smell it in winter, the ice and diesel, and something faintly chemical underneath. There was no signage. There were 2 men outside who looked at her the way security looked at everyone, measuring, bored, already certain of the outcome. She told them her name. She told them why she was there. One of them went inside. She stood in the cold and waited. The man who came to get her was not Whitmore. He was younger, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had been rearranged at least once. He didn't introduce himself. He just held the door open and looked at her until she walked through it. Inside was warmer than she expected. The space had been renovated, the bones of the old warehouse still visible in the exposed beams and the original brick. But there were offices now, proper ones, and a long conference table she caught a glimpse of through a glass partition. It looked like a company. It was a company, she supposed. He led her up a set of metal stairs and stopped outside a closed door. "He's got 5 minutes," the man said, not to her. To the door, almost, like he was warning someone on the other side. Then he opened it and stepped back. The office was spare. No photographs. No decorations that she could see except for a topographic map pinned to one wall and a whiteboard covered in columns of figures that she found herself trying to read before she caught herself. A desk. 2 chairs. A window that looked out over the port. Whitmore was standing with his back to her when she came in. He turned around, and she understood immediately why people didn't argue with him. It wasn't the size. He was tall but not imposing in the way the man at the door was. It was something else, the quality of his attention. The way he looked at her like he was already 3 steps ahead of the conversation and was waiting, with the particular patience of a man who had time, for her to catch up. He was somewhere in his early 40s, she guessed. Dark hair, a little grey at the temples, a scar along the left side of his jaw that he hadn't bothered to hide. He was wearing a suit that cost more than 3 months of her old salary. And he wore it the way people who'd worked hard for expensive things did. Like he'd earned it and he knew it, and he didn't need you to acknowledge it. He looked at her for a moment. "You're Dermot's niece," he said. "Saoirse Keane," she said, "and I think you already know that." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, something more cautious than a smile. "Sit down," he said. She didn't. "I'm fine standing." The pause that followed was long enough that she started to wonder if she'd made a mistake. Then he sat down himself behind the desk and gestured at the chair across from him with 2 fingers. "Your uncle's debt," he said. "You know the number." "I know your number," she said. "I've been going through his books. Your number and his number aren't the same." Whitmore looked at her. "His records show 240,000, she said. "Your letter says 380. The difference is $140,000, and there's no documentation for it anywhere in his ledgers, which means either he kept a second set of books I haven't found yet, or someone adjusted the total after he died." The silence in the room was very complete. "That's a serious accusation," Whitmore said. "It's a serious discrepancy," Saoirse said. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm telling you what the numbers say. You do what you want with that." She thought she'd pushed too far. She'd known it was possible when she walked in. She'd walked in anyway, because the alternative was accepting a number she didn't believe, and she'd never in her life been able to do that. Whitmore leaned back in his chair. He studied her for a long moment with that same unhurried attention. "Who went through his books?" he said. "Before you." "I don't know," she said. "That's the problem." He picked up a pen from the desk, set it down. She got the impression he was thinking through several things at once, and she was only seeing the surface of it. "Where are you working?" he said. "I'm not. Not right now." "What did you do before?" "Logistics company. I was their head of accounts until 18 months ago." She paused. "Why? Because," Whitmore said, "if what you're telling me is accurate, I have a problem inside my own operation. And you apparently found evidence of it in 4 days going through your dead uncle's filing cabinet." She didn't say anything. "I have a bookkeeper," he said. "He's been with me 11 years. "I'm sure he has," Saoirse said. The silence stretched again. Outside, she could hear the wind off the lake rattling something metal somewhere in the building. "Leave me your number," Whitmore said finally. "I'll look into it. And the debt. On hold," he said, "until I know which number is right." She wrote her number on a post-it from the block on his desk. She was at the door when he spoke again. "Mrs. Keene?" She turned. "If you're wrong," he said, "I'll let you know. And if I'm right." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Then we'll have a different conversation." He called her back in 5 days. She'd spent those 5 days assuming he wouldn't, drafting plans in her head for what she'd do when the 380 demand landed on her doorstep again, and she had no more cards to play. She'd looked into the law briefly. She'd looked into her options, which were not good. She'd slept badly and eaten worse, and stood in her uncle's office for long stretches of time just looking at the books, like they might tell her something new. When Whitmore's number came up on her phone on a Thursday morning, she stood there looking at it for 3 full rings before she answered. "Come back in," he said. No preamble, no hello. She was beginning to understand that this was simply how he talked. She went back in. The man at the door, she'd learned since that his name was Branagh, that he'd been with Whitmore since they were both in their 20s, that he was the closest thing Whitmore had to a right hand, led her up the stairs again. Same hallway, same closed door. Inside, the office had changed. There were files on the desk now, several of them open. Whitmore was standing at the whiteboard, but the columns of figures had been erased and replaced with something else, a kind of flowchart she couldn't fully read from the door. He turned when she came in. "You were right," he said. Not an apology, a statement of fact. She'd known it, obviously. Knowing it and having him confirm it were different things. "How much?" she said. "Close to 200,000 over 3 years, adjusted across multiple accounts." He paused. "You found the thread in 4 days. I found the first inconsistency," she said. "I didn't follow it all the way." "No," he said, "but you knew where to look." He turned back to the whiteboard and then turned again, like he was thinking aloud. "The person who did this has been with me longer than your uncle had his shop." She understood what that meant, what it cost to say it. She didn't remark on it. "What happened to my uncle's actual number?" she said. 240 is what he owed." Whitmore said it flatly. "That's the number we're working from." She nodded. The relief was quieter than she expected. "Cleaner. I want to offer you a job," he said. She stared at him. "Not." He stopped, made a slight gesture with his hand, the first time she'd seen him anything close to uncertain. "Not what you're thinking. Accounts. Bookkeeping. I need someone who sees what you saw." "You're offering me your dead bookkeeper's job," she said. "I'm offering you a job," he said, The salary's better than logistics. You'll work from here, you'll have access to everything you need, and you'll report directly to me." "And that's separate," he said. "That was your uncle's debt. I'm not in the business of transferring family obligations." A pause. "Unless I need to be." She looked at him for a long moment, the scar on his jaw, the whiteboard behind him with its careful, complicated diagram, the files spread open on the desk. "You don't know me," she said. "I know you walked in here alone and told me my number was wrong," he said. "That's more than most people manage." She thought about the job she didn't have, the office that wasn't really hers, the bank and what they'd do with the building by spring. "I want to see the contract," she said. "There isn't one," he said. "Of course there wasn't." "Then I want 30 days, she said. "Trial period. If it's not working for either of us, I walk." He considered this. 20. She took it. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself this every morning for the first 2 weeks, standing at the window of the office they gave her. A real one, at the end of the hall, with a door that closed and a lock on it, going through the inherited mess of 11 years of creative accounting. The work itself she understood, the context she had to learn, and she learned it carefully, without asking questions she didn't need to ask, the same way she'd learned everything, by watching, by reading between lines, by paying attention to what happened in the margins. She understood, gradually, the shape of what Whitmore ran. It was not small. It stretched across parts of the city she'd never had reason to be in, and across other things she was less certain about, and she filed all of it away in the same part of her mind where she kept things that were true and necessary, and not for discussion. Branagh she understood within the first week. He was suspicious of her in a way that was almost professional, not hostiles, just careful. He watched her the way you watched a variable that hadn't declared itself yet. She didn't take it personally. She was suspicious of most things herself. There was another man she encountered less frequently. She learned his name from overhearing it. Calder, though she wasn't sure if that was his first name or his last. He was quieter than Branagh, which she wouldn't have thought possible, and he had the particular stillness of someone who spent a lot of time waiting for things to happen. He was younger than Whitmore by maybe 5 years, with lighter coloring and an accent that placed him somewhere east of the city originally, maybe Quebec. She didn't understand his role at first. She understood it better after she caught him going through her desk on a Tuesday evening when she came back from the printer. He straightened up when she came in, didn't look especially embarrassed. "If you want to see the files," she said, "I can just show them to you." He looked at her. Then he said, "You're very calm. I'm tired," she said. "There's a difference. What were you looking for?" He told her after a moment. It was a reasonable thing to be looking for. She found it in the third drawer down and handed it to him without comment. He took it. Then he stood there for a moment like he was deciding something. "You didn't tell Whitmore," he said. The next morning, at the coffee station in the hallway. It wasn't quite a question. "No," she said. "Why not?" She considered how to answer that. "Because whatever you were looking for wasn't about me," she said finally. "And I'm not interested in making problems. I don't have to." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely name. Something between assessment and, possibly, something warmer. "You've worked in logistics," he said. 11 years, counting internships. You like it?" "I like numbers," she said. "I don't have strong feelings about the industry." He poured his coffee. She poured hers. They stood there in the hallway for a moment in the particular way of two people who have more to say and are deciding whether to say it. "The files I was looking for," he said. "They're related to something I've been tracking for about 4 months. The pipeline discrepancies in the Western accounts," she said. He looked at her sharply. "I wasn't snooping," she said. "It came up while I was reconstructing the old ledgers. The pattern's been there since before I started. How long? 18 months that I can document," she said. "Possibly longer." Calder set down his coffee. He looked like he was revising something. "You should tell Whitmore," he said. "I was going to," she said. "I was waiting until I had a cleaner picture." "How long until you have that?" 3, 4 days. He looked at her for another moment. "I'll wait," he said, "until you do." she told Whitmore on a Friday afternoon. She laid it out the same way she'd laid everything out, clearly, without drama, the numbers doing the work for her. She showed him the pattern in the Western accounts, the 18-month window, the 3 names that kept surfacing in proximity to the inconsistencies. She watched his face as she talked. He gave nothing away, which she was used to by now. But there was something underneath the stillness that she'd learned to read, a particular tension in the set of his jaw that meant the information was landing harder than he was letting on. When she finished, he sat very still for a moment. "One of those names," he said, "I've worked with for 8 years." She didn't say anything. "The other 2, he said, "are connected to a deal I signed last month." "I know," she said quietly. He looked at her. "You knew about the deal?" "I found the contracts while I was going through the reconstruction," she said. "I wasn't looking for them. They were relevant to the cash flow timeline, so I read them." He held her gaze for a long moment. She didn't look away. It had taken her a few weeks to learn that looking away from Whitmore was the wrong choice. Not because he demanded it, but because he noticed it, filed it away, drew conclusions from it. "Calder knew about this," he said. "He was tracking part of it," she said. "Separately. We compared notes." "When?" "Tuesday." The quiet in the room was a different quality than the quiet she'd sat in the first time she'd come here. It was heavier. There was more in it. "You've been here 22 days, Whitmore said. "Yes, your 20 days were up 2 days ago." She'd been aware of this. She hadn't said anything, because she wasn't finished yet, and she'd found that finishing things mattered more to her than technically accurate timelines. "I know," she said. He looked at the papers on the desk between them. The careful, patient work of 3 weeks. Then he looked up at her. "What do you want?" he said. It surprised her that he asked it that way, directly. Like the answer actually mattered. She thought about the office with the lock on the door, the work that used all of her, the part of her brain that had been sitting idle for a year and a half. The fact that she'd come in here 2 weeks ago fully prepared to tell him about the pipeline problem, even though she didn't owe him that. Even though she could have walked out at 20 days and let him find it himself or not find it at all. "I want the 240 formally zeroed," she said. "Not deferred." "Gone done," he said, without hesitation. "And I want a proper arrangement," she said. "Not a handshake. Something with terms I can see. Still no contract," he said. "Then terms I can see and that Branagh witnesses," she said. "So there's a record." He almost smiled. She'd learned to recognize the almost smiles by now, the slight shift at the corner of his mouth, there and gone. "All right," he said. "And I want the Western account access," she said, "to finish it properly. Whatever's left. You'll have it," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "Is that everything?" She thought about what to say next. She'd been thinking about it, actually, for the last few days. "One more thing," she said. "The 3 names. I'll handle them," he said. And the way he said it closed the subject. "I know you will," she said. "But you should know, the one you've worked with for 8 years. I don't think it was his idea. The pattern around him is different from the other 2. He's sloppy in a different way, panicked maybe, like someone put pressure on him from outside and he broke." Whitmore looked at her. "That doesn't excuse it," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it might be worth knowing who did the pushing," she said, "before you close it." The room was quiet for a long moment. Outside she could hear the port, the creak and mechanical groan of something large and slow-moving in the cold. "You've been doing this for 3 weeks," he said. "I've been looking at numbers since I was 14, she said. "The numbers don't change. The people do." He looked at her for a long time after that. She had the sense, as she sometimes did with him, that there were 2 conversations happening at once. The one they were having out loud, and another one running underneath it, that neither of them had found the language for yet. "Branagh's going to tell me I'm making a mistake," he said. "Probably," she said. "You should listen to him. That's what he's there for." "And what are you there for?" She thought about the columns of figures. The patterns she saw before other people noticed there were patterns to see. The 200,000 recovered, the 18 months untangled, the 3 names on the desk between them. "The books," she said simply. He nodded, once, Slowly, the way he nodded when something was done. Deliberating, she stood up to leave. "Keen," he said. She stopped. "The first time you came in," he said. "When I told you to sit down, I remember." "You didn't," he said. She looked back at him. "No, why not?" She thought about it honestly. "Because I'd driven 40 minutes in a snowstorm to tell you that your number was wrong," she said. "If I was going to be scared of you, I was going to do it standing up." He looked at her for a long moment. "Go fix the Western accounts," he said. She did. The story of how the books got fixed was not, in the end, a dramatic one. That surprised people sometimes, when pieces of it came out sideways. A word here, a reference there. The kind of thing that circulates in certain parts of a city the way all information circulates, slowly and not always accurately. People expected a story with violence in it, with confrontation, with the satisfying crash of large things falling. What actually happened was quieter. Saoirse sat in the office with the locked door for another 3 weeks and followed the numbers where they led. The 3 names resolved themselves the way such things resolved, in their own time, with consequences she was not part of and did not ask about. Branagh did tell Whitmore he was making a mistake. She knew this because Branagh told her he'd told Whitmore he was making a mistake, apparently deciding that honesty on this point was the most efficient approach. "What did he say?" she asked. "He said he was aware of the risk," Branagh said. He looked at her for a moment with the careful, measuring expression she'd gotten used to. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think he's probably right." She wasn't sure if he meant about the risk or about the decision. She didn't ask. She was learning in this place that there were questions that mattered and questions that didn't, and the ones that didn't matter could be left where they were. Calder she saw more often now, as the Western account work continued and their overlap grew. He had a habit of leaving coffee on her desk when he passed her office, and she was clearly deep in something, not stopping to interrupt, just setting it down quietly and moving on. She noticed this the 3rd time it happened, and didn't say anything about it until the 5th, when she happened to catch him in the act. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll get my own." "You won't," he said. "You'll stay in that chair for 4 hours and forget." He paused. "I've been watching." She looked at him. He looked back at her with an expression that was somewhere between matter-of-fact and possibly something else. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and kept walking. The day the Western accounts were finally clean, every thread followed, every inconsistency resolved, a full report sitting in a folder on her desk that she'd started and completed and could stand behind completely. She sat in her office for a few minutes without doing anything, just sitting. The fluorescent hum, the port sounds through the window, the particular silence of finished work. Then she printed the report, walked it down the hall to Whitmore's office, and knocked. He was on the phone when she came in. He looked up, and she held up the folder. He said something into the phone and ended the call. She set the folder on his desk. He opened it. She stood and waited the way she'd learned to wait. Without fidgeting, without filling her silence, just present, he read it. All of it, which took 20 minutes, because she was thorough and she didn't apologize for it. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked up. "This is complete," he said. "Yes, everything. Everything I could find," she said, "which I'm confident is everything there is." He looked at her. "The organization is clean," she said, for the first time in at least 2 years. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How do you know it's been 2 years?" "Because that's how far back the contamination goes," she said. "I checked the earlier records to establish a baseline. Before 2 years ago, the books are consistent." He picked up the folder again, not to read it but just to hold it, she thought. Like weight that meant something. "Keen," he said. "Yes, you drove here in a snowstorm to tell me my number was wrong," he said, "and then you stayed." She didn't answer, because it wasn't really a question. "Why?" he said. She thought about the answer, the real one, not the simple one. "Because the work needed doing," she said, "and I was the one who could do it." He held her gaze. "And because," she said more quietly, "I needed somewhere that needed what I'm actually good at." The room was very still. "You should know," he said, "that this makes things more complicated." "I'm aware," she said. Branagh will tell you you're making a mistake, she said. I know, you should keep listening to him. And you, he said. Should I listen to you? She met his eyes. The scar, the grey at his temples. The quality of attention that she'd thought at first was intimidating and had come to understand was simply what it looked like when someone took you seriously. When it's about the books, she said, always. He almost smiled. The real version, this time, she caught the edge of it before it was gone. And when it's not about the books, he said. She thought about the locked door, the coffee she didn't have to get herself, the work that used all of her, the strange, inconvenient fact that she had not once in 8 weeks wanted to be somewhere else. You're figuring that out, she said. So am I. He looked at her for a long moment, then he said, the organization has a board meeting in 3 weeks. I'd like you to present the findings. She blinked. To the board, yes, your board, yes, Keen. She held that for a moment, the weight of what it meant in this world, to stand in front of the people who made the decisions and show them what you'd found and speak to it directly with your name attached. All right, she said. Bring Calder, he said. He'll give you the context you need for the room. She nodded. She was at the door when he spoke again. Keen, yes, the baseline, he said. Before 2 years ago, the books are clean, completely, she said. That was before my last Bookkeeper came on. Yes, she said, I know. He looked at her. In his expression, she saw, not for the first time, the shape of a man who trusted very few people, and the complicated, careful way he was holding the question of whether to add one more to the number. She looked back at him with the particular steadiness she'd built over years of finding the truth inside columns of figures that weren't supposed to have one. Get some sleep, he said. The board meeting is early. She went back to her office. She turned off the light. She stood at the window for a moment and looked out at the port, in the dark, the water invisible beyond the lights, the city behind her enormous and indifferent, and full of things she was beginning, carefully, to understand. Then she picked up her coat and went home. For the first time in a very long time, she thought she might actually sleep.